Jayatilleka, the newly appointed U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asian Affairs, Mr. Robert Blake's replacement, Nisha Desai Biswa, was recently in Sri Lanka, her first time in the country since taking up her new post. She said some things at the end, at the media briefing convened at the end of her visit, where she said that patience is wearing thin with Sri Lanka, and where she said that democracy is under threat. And it seemed a bit, the wording of her statement seemed a lot stronger than anything that Assistant Secretary Blake had said before. Is this a sign of worse things to come for Sri Lanka in the global arena?
We had a very good opportunity in late 2009 when President Secretary of State John Kerry co-authored a report with Richard Lugar on Sri Lanka. The powerful Senate Foreign Relations Committee, they co-authored it. And it was fairly favorable towards Sri Lanka. However, it said that it expects movement on two fronts. That is political dialogue with the Tamil leadership, and less so on accountability, by the way. It was quite moderate on accountability, but they did want us to clean up our act. We didn't do it. The Sri Lankan attitude, if you go back to the newspapers of that time, the official Sri Lankan discourse was, hey, the Americans have realized that they got it wrong all the time, and now, can you see, they've climbed down, let them stew in their own juice, they're going to climb down a little further. I even remember a formal speech delivered at, I think it was the Olcott commemoration speech delivered by our current ambassador, PR in Geneva, which took the line that, well, the world has got it wrong, and now they'd better line up in order to catch up and get in on the act in post-war Sri Lanka. There's a queue. Or get in line. That's not the way it works. There was a window of opportunity. We could have climbed through that window in late 2009. The signals were very clear. Now that deal is no longer on the table. It's gone. Now
we're the ones who are doing.
Yeah. Now it's crunch time. It need not have been this way. Whatever Nisha Biswa says, and whatever Professor Piri says in reply, and I read the statement, what's important to remember is that they've got to convince that council. It's to do with a vote. If we are able to convince the council, it doesn't matter what we say on paper here, we should be able to convince a council in which the majority are from the Asia Pacific, Africa and Latin American regions. And Nisha Biswal has to convince that majority of her case. So that's the way it is. And right now, I think the American case is very unfair. Very unfair. It's hypocritical and unfair. Well, Nadeem, in the first place, if one is to have an international inquiry about any stage of any war, there are plenty of other wars in which the United States has participated, Britain has participated, and their allies and friends have participated, which should be ahead of us in any queue. Secondly, if you look around the world, that is not the way in which these issues have been addressed. So the Americans are asking us to do something that nobody has done, and the Sri Lankan government is not willing to do things that everybody has done. So, on the one hand, we have unfairness, and on the other hand, we have unreason.
But don't you think, Dr. Jayatilleka, that this lack of reason, this lack of compromise on the Sri Lankan government's part is what has led to this unfairness and this hypocrisy?
Well, I think what has led, well, you're a student of the classics, if I remember, it's what the Greeks call hubris.
Hubris, exactly.
It's pride after a victory. And the Greeks always warned against hubris. So after 2009, until 2009, we more or less got it right. But from the morning after, we felt that we could, we'd taken on the Tigers, we defeated the Tigers. We forgot that we defeated Prabhakaran's army but not Balasiнгham's army out there in the West, especially in Britain. We forgot that we won the war against the Tigers, but that didn't mean that we could dismantle or permanently freeze the Indo-Lanka Accord and the 13th Amendment and the Provincial Council system. Because we hadn't fought the Indians and won. We fought the Tigers. So the government of Sri Lanka failed to understand the limits of power, the limits of our victory. The lack of rationality and a realistic outlook led us to this situation. Again, going back to the Greeks, it's identified mostly with Socrates, but the ancient Greeks did say that the most dangerous thing in the world is unacknowledged ignorance. I think it's unacknowledged ignorance that is done for us.
You think that's what's evident in Sri Lanka at the moment, unacknowledged ignorance?
Oh, absolutely. If I had to name two things, I would say hubris and unacknowledged ignorance. Only one, I'd say unacknowledged ignorance. The compromise need not have been made with the United States, Nadeem. The problem is that, like the UNP in domestic politics, we've been losing our base vote in Geneva. In 2009, we had 29, they had 12. In 2013, we had 12. Complete inversion. In a place where 72% of the voters, I've said before, come from Asia Pacific, Africa, Latin America. So, we should have compromised with our natural vote base, our natural constituents, not with the West. Because the West is always going to be diaspora driven.
I suppose you could argue that when we don't do something that would enable our friends to support us, our friends will not support.
Oh, absolutely.
It's as simple as that.
Absolutely. I told you about Shah Zukang, the former Sri Lankan, the former ambassador of China to Sri Lanka, who was Under Secretary General of the UN in New York when we met several times in Geneva, in Lisbon, in Paris, and he gave me some clear messages over time, which I conveyed to the executive, but I think the people of Sri Lanka deserve to know it. I told you about one such. There was another message which he gave me, and he also gave our counterpart in New York, because this I know. And this is what he said. Identify your principal and core national interest and defend it doggedly, make no concessions and compromises on that. But you have to identify it correctly, the primary national interest. Point 2. On the secondary issues, be flexible and willing to compromise. Don't get the two confused. Point 3. Help your friends to help you. Point 4. You always have China's support, but you are secure when the whole of Asia can support you, which means China and India together. So concentrate your efforts on your relationship with your neighbor. This was the message which was given to me verbally and which was given to my colleague, counterpart who is still serving in New York, and I know that this was relayed, I relayed it personally to the President, and I know that it was also relayed from New York. Now, I believe that the President understood this intuitively. I mean, he's politically intuitive. But I don't think that within the ruling Troika, and certainly the power structure, that this was understood. The famous Chinese strategist sage of old, Sun Tzu, in The Art of War says, he who strives to defend everything defends nothing. So, we've gone one better, one worse than Sun Tzu. We think we know. We try to defend everything. So, don't do what the Americans say, that's fine. Don't do what the Indians want, don't do what the South Africans advise, don't do what the Brazilians are asking for, don't do what the LLRC recommends. They're all enemies. You can sum this whole thing up, Nadeem, in the ridiculous slogan, let's be like Israel.
Dr. Jayatilleka, every time that the finger is pointed at the government saying that nothing is being done or not enough is being done, the argument that the government always puts forward, this happened in Geneva last year as well, and I believe even very recently even the Minister of External Affairs has given this argument, which is that Sri Lanka needs time and space. It also comes to Ms. Biswal's statement where patience is wearing thin. Now this time and space that Sri Lanka is asking for, I recall when journalists questioned Ms. Biswal at the press conference in Colombo, where she said, why can't the US give time and space? She's like, how much time and space do you actually give? What is this time and space that Sri Lanka is asking for? I mean, we did devise a national action plan to implement certain LLRC recommendations, if I'm not mistaken. So what is the government's play here? What is it exactly trying to do? Is it because we've made commitments to India with regard to the 13th Amendment? There's all this talk of 13 plus and all that a couple of years ago. Now there's talk of the National Action Plan, and we need time and space to put this plan into implementation. But at the same time, there's also a Parliamentary Select Committee, which
without anybody in it, basically.
Well, with basically the government in it, which apparently the intention of which is to change the 13th Amendment. If you look at the wording of that Select Committee, it doesn't seem that it's going to strengthen the 13th Amendment, but rather take away from the 13th Amendment. So it's more of a 13 minus than a 13 plus. So what exactly is the government hoping to achieve out of this acharu of policies?
Well, the TNA is not going into the Parliamentary Select Committee, which has that ambiguous wording. So that's out. It doesn't mean a thing. A Select Committee without the TNA is Hamlet without the Prince of Denmark. So that's gone. The time and space thing works like this. Some countries have taken decades to come through on accountability. I mean, the British, on one incident, Bloody Sunday, Londonderry, 1972, broad daylight, no fog of war, only one side arm, British paratroopers. It took 28 years and 2 commissions, and nobody was punished. Some members of the British paratroop unit that was involved, I think, got Queen's honours. Now, it's okay if you can say, look, we are going to take all the time and space we want, and we can hold out. But can we? Because Sri Lanka is vulnerable. First, it's vulnerable strategically. We are an island on the doorstep of India. Secondly, we are vulnerable economically. Now, why is it that we don't get the time and space that other guys have been given? One of the reasons is the reality, which is not going away, that there are 80 million Tamil people. 70 million of them are in Tamil Nadu. Now that's not going to change. We are never going to be closer to Iceland or Antarctica than we are to India. Tamil Nadu is not going to move to where Uttar Pradesh is.